Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a stack of material that tackles something really powerful, sometimes uncomfortable, and just deeply human, telling your own story.
That's right. Our sources for this deep dive, they're centered around insights from essays by Melissa Febos. She really digs into why we feel this pull to write our lives,
Hmm.
and the surprising forces that push back against it, and what it really takes to grapple with those difficult, challenging truths on the page.
We've got articles here, personal reflections, some research, historical context. It's all layered together, giving us a really rich picture.
Yeah, and our mission today is basically to pull out the core insights about personal narrative, especially when the subject matter gets into things like, well, trauma, shame,
Yeah,
sex.
right.
We want to understand its connection to knowing ourselves, to healing, and maybe even, broader social change. We'll try to uncover why these stories matter so much and what the actual act of writing them demands.
And this deep dive is really for you, the listener. Whether you're just curious why memoirs resonate, or maybe you're wrestling with your own experiences yourself.
Or maybe even thinking about putting pen to paper.
Exactly. It's about understanding the power and maybe the price of revealing your truth. Let's unpack this.
Okay.
Okay. So our material kicks off by framing writing not just as like a technical skill, but as something woven right into life itself.
Totally. Political, physical, spiritual, psychological, social,
Mhm.
all of it.
It's presented almost as a tool for survival, maybe even service, and a kind of freedom.
And yet, what jumps out immediately from the sources is this huge amount of resistance,
Hmm.
especially to personal narrative, memoir.
Yeah.
You see writers themselves kind of sneering at it, calling it therapy, or just, publishing a diary.
Right, there's that quote from William H. Gass asking if the motives aren't tainted with conceit.
Yeah, or making yourself a monster.
He actually uses that word. The author says she heard arguments like that her whole writing life. It's kind of ingrained.
And the sources really argue this isn't just casual discouragement. It's not superficial.
No.
The author shares her own story, her reluctance as a young MFA student to even think about writing a memoir about being a dominatrix and a former addict.
Yeah, she talks about intense shame, questioning who she even was to think her life was interesting enough.
But she describes the story itself as calling to her, urgent,
Yeah.
but incredibly difficult.
Hmm.
It demanded she walk back through her most mystifying choices and excavate events for which she had been numb. That sounds
Yeah.
intense.
Incredibly challenging, yeah.
And it ties right into a key point the sources make. This resistance to personal stories, especially for marginalized voices.
Hmm.
It's directly linked to forces that resist social change.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the author mentions Diane Million's work on Indigenous women's first-person narratives. These weren't just stories, they were political acts.
How so?
They challenged the dominant, supposedly objective histories. They transformed personal shame into collective social change.
Wow.
And the sources trace this historically, connecting it all the way back to how we've dealt with trauma stories. Think about hysteria.
Right, the wandering womb idea seems absurd now.
Totally absurd. But then Freud and Brewer started seeing it differently,
Right.
Caused by traumatic events.
Right.
And the solution, putting those stories into words, the talking cure.
Talking cure, yeah.
But here's where it gets, well, honestly, a bit chilling, according to these sources.
Uh-huh.
Freud's initial finding, linking hysteria to widespread childhood sexual abuse. He retracted it.
He pulled back. Why?
The sources suggest the social implications were just too much, too uncomfortable. It pointed fingers at predators in the upper classes.
Oh.
He basically chose his reputation, his comfort, over his patient's truth. That's the argument here.
And the sources say this shows a pattern.
An ongoing pattern, yeah.
Yeah.
A society that resists change will deny, discredit, punish those who speak out about trauma.
But conversely,
Conversely, the sources argue powerfully that social justice depends on the testimonies of the oppressed. They link feminist consciousness-raising groups, sharing stories directly to creating domestic violence shelters, rape crisis centers.
real-world impact.
Exactly. And veterans groups sharing stories led to recognizing PTSD. Hearing these stories is presented as vital for people who haven't experienced these harms to understand, to join the movement for justice.
So that dismissal of trauma memoirs, it's not just about literary taste.
Not at all. According to this, it's often, fundamentally, a resistance to social justice movements.
Yeah.
Writing your embodied truth, the difficult parts, it can be an inherently political act.
Okay, wow. So we've got this idea, personal narrative is powerful, political, often resisted. But what about the writing itself? Is it somehow easier than, say, fiction.
The sources push back hard on that. Really
Yeah.
hard. The author's super clear. Writing her memoir, it demanded serious time invested in craft, plot, scenes, pacing, all the stuff fiction
All
needs.
right, the technical skill.
But what made it uniquely difficult was the internal work. She says it required destroying her own self-image, facing really uncomfortable truths about her own accountability.
An important thing.
Exactly. She calls it the hardest thing she'd ever done. But she also says it made her a better person, and importantly for the work, her book, a better book.
Mm-hmm. She connects this to navel-gazing, right, which is usually a put-down.
Yeah, but she reframes it. It's not narcissism, she argues. It requires immense bravery, honest self-appraisal, looking inward truthfully. That's the opposite of narcissism.
It's doing the heart work, as Rilke called it.
Precisely. And writing about trauma specifically is framed as subversive.
How so?
Because it directly challenges that stigma of victimhood that oppressive forces use to silence survivors, to gaslight them. The sources even bring in statistics on sexual violence just to hammer home. And this isn't some niche topic. It's not a dead horse. It's pervasive, vital.
There's also this interesting bit about how our own biases shape what stories we think are even worthy.
Oh yeah, that's fascinating. The author admits her own past high tolerance for media dominated by men and feeling almost embarrassed consuming media mainly about women.
That's surprising to hear admitted so openly.
Right. And she talks about how marginalized identities often get treated as only relevant to people in that group. This conditioning, she argues, makes us question if subjects like, say, girlhood are really worth a few hours of a reader's time.
Yeah.
We internalize that doubt.
And this conditioning affects the writing process, too.
Deeply. She shares feedback she got on early memoir drafts, like someone asking, what were you feeling? When she described really hard experiences.
Like she was detached.
Exactly. And her therapist pointed out she was still acting like Justine, her old dumb persona.
Ah, so she wasn't.
She wasn't writing the story of what happened initially. This is a crucial insight from the sources. She was writing the story she had been telling herself as those events happened, the survival narrative.
The protective shell.
Yes. The sources link this to Susan Sontag's idea about pornography characters often liking insight, stuck in repetitive patterns. The author realized her early drafts were kind of doing that. Her persona, Justine, was intelligent, sure, but lacked the deeper, reflective insight needed for memoir.
So how did she get past that?
It required what the sources call a differentiation project, actively figuring out her own desires and feelings, separate from all the narratives and values she'd soaked up from outside.
That sounds like a lot of work.
Huge. She had to recover feelings, disgust, arousal, humiliation, fear that she hadn't fully accessed back then, often obscured by drugs or just survival mode,
Yeah.
And this process, the sources suggest, it parallels the idea that the writer needs to be fully awake in the telling. She uses this great analogy about her psychotherapist mother.
Oh, yeah.
Her mom would only get drowsy during sessions if the patients weren't telling their whole truth, if they were performing a persona.
Like the writing itself gets sleepy if it's not authentic.
Exactly. Yeah. A detached reiteration of a detached experience just lacks that essential insight. It doesn't land.
Okay, so that internal work is key. And carrying on from that, a big chunk of the sources dives specifically into writing about sex. That feels like, well, its own minefield, right?
Absolutely, a huge one. The author argues pretty strongly that our ability to write about sex honestly, fully, is super limited by the narratives we've inherited.
What kind of narratives?
Often that, bodies are primarily for sex and sex is primarily for men, or viewed through a male lens. Undoing that lifelong education, as she calls it, is a major project for a writer.
And you can imagine the pushback.
Immediate. She talks about being asked after her first book, "Aren't you ashamed?" Even though the book was about rejecting shame.
Wow.
This external shaming is constant, she says, and it directly impacts your ability to be honest about bodies and sex on the page.
So how does that play out in the craft and the writing itself?
Well, the sources suggest that often when writing sex scenes, we're unconsciously performing. We're driven by those inherited values, not conscious artistic choices. So a big focus becomes actively challenging the rules, often unwritten rules of sex writing.
Like what kind of rules?
Well, one she highlights is this idea of banning certain words like cock, pussy, vagina.
People really suggest banning words.
Apparently. But the sources argue the problem isn't the words themselves, it's that sex has been exiled in our minds. Isolated, limited, made to serve, as she puts it, a privileged class of protagonists and their specific experiences. She uses this example from Eileen Miles' book Inferno, describing a pussy using words like soup or crutch.
Which might sound shocking out of context.
Right, but the sources argue the power of Miles's writing transforms these often degraded words. It imbues them with reverence. It's like an act of recreation, reclaiming them.
Okay, I said. And another crucial point seems to be that sex doesn't have to be good.
Exactly. Not in the conventional moral sense, or even healthy sense sometimes. It can be awkward, unsatisfying, messy. It can even be driven by things like profound grief, like in Cheryl Strayed's writing.
Which brings up this challenge of image management.
Yeah, especially for writers from marginalized groups, like queer people or sex workers. There can be this intense pressure to depict sex in idealized ways, wholesome ways almost.
To counter negative stereotypes?
Precisely,
Yeah.
to counter claims of depravity. But the author argues this curated depiction, it erases humanity, depicting the full range of our humanity, even if that includes realistically bad queer sex or the drudgery and dissociation of sex work. That's actually the best argument against erasure.
Showing the whole picture.
Yeah, she uses examples from Raven Leilani, Garth Greenwell, writers showing sex scenes that defy goodness. They might involve acts that seem strange, like face-spitting maybe.
Okay.
But in the context of the characters, the relationship, these acts reveal incredibly deep truths or complex intimacy.
It's about the meaning within the context.
Totally. It connects to this idea. Sex is what you call it. Her mom taught her early on that sex wasn't just intercourse. Challenging that narrow, often heterosexual definition is key, especially if your experiences fall outside that norm. A scene isn't sidelined or a punchline unless the writer makes it so.
So, writing well about sex isn't just about the act.
Not at all, according to this. It's about writing sex into the character's mind. Emotions, history, body, their whole world. The character's relationship to sex, like in Carmen Maria Machado's work, can reveal way more than just the mechanics.
And this section wraps up by bringing in Audre Lorde.
Yeah, referencing uses of the erotic, defining the erotic much more broadly than just the sexual. It's this deep connection to self that enables connection with others. And this erotic knowledge becomes a lens for evaluating your life, honestly, demands rigor. It leads to writing as transformation, not just, toking out what happened.
Yeah.
Transcription.
Okay, so we've covered the internal work, the challenges of topic and craft. But what about writing about other people? That seems unavoidable in memoir.
Oh, it's a huge challenge, and the sources tackle it head on.
What do they say?
Well, the author's pretty blunt. Writing worthwhile books often upsets people. Period. She says she's faced consequences for writing things she couldn't say out loud before, precisely because it would upset others.
So what's the advice?
There's some practical, maybe tough advice. Often, you just have to write the book first. Don't censor yourself too early, worrying about how, say, your mother will react.
Why not?
The logic is you won't really know which details are essential until the whole story is down. Leaving things out too early can gut the book, make it weaker.
That makes sense. She shares her own experience with her mother reading her book.
Yeah, very personally. Calls it a conversation she wouldn't wish on anyone, which tells you how hard it was.
Wow.
Her mother's main concern was needing to know she would be all right after reading it. It just shows the deep impact. But she does note her mother handled it with aplomb, and their relationship actually got stronger eventually.
But there's also the risk of backlash from communities.
Definitely. The sources mention the potential for vilification, even from within your own marginalized group, if your story doesn't fit a certain narrative. She experienced that with former dumb colleagues. Partly, she thinks, because she didn't share the book beforehand.
There was one specific incident that really changed her view on ethics.
Yes, a pivotal moment. She felt she caused real harm writing about someone, and it led her to completely revise her understanding. She now feels it's profoundly unfair that the writer gets to author the public version of a shared story.
Unfair. How?
Because any shared story has as many true variations as persons involved.
Yeah.
Like different facets of a prism, right? The writer fixes one version into print.
I see. She talks about trying to write about an ex-lover.
Yeah, a really difficult story. She tried not to inculpate or upset her, leaving out details she thought would protect them both.
How did that work out?
Badly. It made the narrative confusing for readers, and the ex ended up being really upset anyway, coming for her, as she puts it, after publication.
So what was the lesson there?
The breakthrough, and this is so powerful in the sources, came when she wrote the truer story. The one without the self-censorship aimed at protection.
And that allowed her?
It allowed her to see the X's humanity, yes.
Yeah.
But crucially, it forced her to finally recognize her own complicity in the relationship's dynamics.
Ah, her own role.
Yes. She realized she'd worshipped her like a god, used her the way she had once used heroin, become powerless over her compulsion. Owning that.
And finding that complicity was key.
Absolutely essential, the sources argue. Not just to write a story worth reading, but for her own freedom, to actually break free from that past dynamic.
Which connects to that quote.
Confessing makes me know myself, and then knowing myself is an act of transforming myself. It's profound.
This links to the idea of authorial distance, the I now versus the I then.
Exactly. The narrator I on the page isn't the same as the writer I today. Memoir needs that interplay between the past I who lived it and the present I, with insight gained since. Writing is the process of comprehension. You gain understanding through the writing.
And the sources draw these parallels with trauma recovery and also teshuva.
Yeah, the Jewish concept of repentance, meaning returning, Maimonides' phases, stop the harm, relate to the past, confess.
How does relating to the past fit in here?
It's about reckoning with your own responsibility. Cohen's idea of recognizing yourself as the maker of your guilt. But the sources reframe it. Writing is learning to know yourself again, to find your own agency in the actions that you have committed.
Finding your agency.
Right. And similarly, recovering is learning to know yourself again. It's the same deep work.
And the third phase, confession, needs a witness.
Yes. Stopping and relating can be internal. Confession is public. The sources say, for the memoirist, this witness isn't necessarily a person in the room, but this idea of a loving audience, a perfect reader out there who needs this story.
So it's not about relying solely on external validation.
No, not necessarily. You still have your internal world, close relationships. The first witnesses aren't strangers. But the idea of that necessary audience provides motivation, validation for the difficult act. The author says she finds faith first on the page, testing the words. Then in the freedom of being seen, maybe not by the literal reader, but by her own higher power, the self capable of loving her past self clean.
There's that anecdote about being finger-banged behind the mall. Seems kind of raw.
It is raw, but it's used as an example of how past trauma, unacknowledged, can fester and come out later in harmful ways.
Yeah.
Facing it directly in writing was crucial for integration.
And she needed help with that.
Oh yeah, therapist, but also believing in that reader who needed the story. That allowed her to find compassion, love for her younger self in that moment.
So the act of writing these unspeakable things.
It's rooted, the sources suggest, in this deep urge to confess, to be seen, to confirm you're still lovable. The performance of confessing, putting it out there, leads to the feeling of confessing being beloved.
And this connects back to the final phase of trauma recovery.
Right, the return to social life. Often by transforming personal tragedy into social action, like #MeToo. Survivors share publicly to help others, connecting to something bigger.
And the memoir itself becomes
A kind of monument, a public manifestation of the writer's story, with political, spiritual power, proof of survival, integration, empowerment, allowing the past to give meaning and purpose to the whole narrative of life.
It's fascinating how the sources seem to suggest these aren't just analogies, writing, recovery, repentance.
Yeah, they suggest it's more fundamental, like they're performing a basic human pattern, one that's much older than our modern biases about memoir.
Like recurring shapes in nature.
Exactly, like spirals and shells, galaxies, DNA. These patterns are presented as fundamental building blocks, visible in our rituals of healing, creation, repentance.
So psychological and spiritual transformation.
They're seen here as maybe two ways of describing the same underlying process, a process that might even manifest biologically. The models we use point to this deeper, shared structure in the less tangible parts of being human.
Okay, so pulling this all together from our deep dive, what have we really learned? Personal narrative is potent. Revolutionary, even.
Definitely potent, and it often faces resistance precisely because it challenges uncomfortable truths, existing power structures.
And writing it takes craft, sure, but huge emotional bravery.
Immense bravery, confronting shame, integrating the past, especially trauma, complex parts of sex, and figuring out your own truth versus what society fed you.
It's a process that mirrors these deep journeys of recovery, repentance, transforming shame, reclaiming agency.
Yeah, turning shame into acceptance, finding your role in your own story.
And writing about others, ethically tricky, requires acknowledging shared stories have many sides.
It's complex, but ultimately telling your truth, even when hard, it's tied to being seen, finding acceptance, and it can empower you and others with similar experiences.
And these individual acts, they tap into something deeper, ancient patterns of human transformation.
That's the suggestion, making personal storytelling just a fundamental part of how we make meaning, find our place.
So for you, the listener, maybe this encourages you to read memoirs with a fresh eye, appreciating the courage, the complexity.
Or maybe, just maybe, it gets you thinking about the stories in your own life, the ones that might hold untapped power if you brought them into the light, even just for yourself.
Here's a final thought to chew on, building on all this. If the sources are right, that writing can be a way to learn to know yourself again, find your agency in your own past actions.
Mhm.
What might you discover about yourself if you just started writing, even with absolutely no idea where it might lead?
Something to think about.
Okay.
Until next time.